Here are 25 hot techs and why you should be considering these for your set championships, so you can win lots of Ursula promos too. With locations being public enemy number 1, Maui's fishhook is starting to see more play. This is a very strong item that has a 3 ink cost. Its shapeshifter power costs 2 ink to use, but it gives one of your characters evasive for the turn and an extra 3 strength this turn. This means you're going to have any one of your characters slam into evasive, like Diablo for example, but it's also really good for turning your characters into location slayers, since Madam Fox now swings for 7, which will clear a Queen's Castle in 1 hit. Although where it starts to get really fun though is where you have Maui in play, because then you can use Shapeshifter for free, and now Maui hits for a monstrous 7 strength, which is enough to clear even Muktuk mana in 1 hit. Probably worth noting that with Fishhook it's possible to use Pinocchio to exert a Tamatoa and banish it all in a single turn if you have Maui as well, without ever letting it quest, which is very nice. So if you are playing Ruby, maybe you should give Fishhook a try. Or if you're so inclined, maybe you could use Hercules instead. A 5 cost character with Russian Reckless are very similar to Maui, but the main difference is that it has 7 strength off the bat, meaning it can clear the way of Queen's Castle on its own. But it is uninkable, so you got to keep that in mind. If you are a green steel player, you might want to consider playing Fang. Fang falls straight into the 4 cost 2 lore locations that we have, like Queen's Castle and Muktuk Manor. And while looking at a quick glance, it might seem that Fang comes up short, only having 6 willpower, compared to Queen's Castle's 7 and Muktuk Manor's crazy 9. However, Fang surrounded by water ability gives it a very unique edge. It gives any character there ward and evasive. This is unparalleled levels of protection, making your Diablos safe from almost anything and everything that tries to harm them, like Babooms and Let the Storm Rage On or Strength from a Raging Fire. This alone gives Fang a massive use case in green steel. However, the main use I loved it for was being able to make aggressive questing with your Beast Tragic hero, because normally you'd have to leave Beast ready so you can keep drawing cards. However, if he's at Fang, you can now quest with him aggressively because he'll normally be safe. And then you can make use of his nice 2 lore questing power as well. And on top of this, we all know that locations are very strong right now, so you also get to make use of that passive 2 lore a turn. Fang was an integral part of me getting top 4 at my first Ursula's Return Set Championships, and I'm sure it will be for you as well. Ursula Eric's Bride. This card can ruin Tamatoa decks in record time. This 4 cost shift character has a killer ability. Whenever she quests, you can look at your opponent's hand and discard any non-character card you find there. This is madness, especially when you consider that she is questing for 2 each a time. Now, there are 2 Ursulas you can shift off, both of which fit this theme nicely. The first one we're going to look at is a 2 cost Ursula that features in Steel Songs. This slots straight into that deck nicely, and you can still keep your 4 Singer present. And what I really like about slotting it in this deck is that with some bare necessities and maybe even Daisy Duck, you now have a killer hand rip control deck on your hands, with all the benefits of Steel Songs as well. For example, on your turn 3, if you have a Singer 3 Cinderella in play and a 2-drop Ursula, you can shift into the Ursula, you can sing bare necessities with the Cinderella and quest with the Ursula as well. This will allow you to rip 2 non-character cards from your opponent's hand, while questing for 2 as well. This can make a mockery of some decks like Tamatoa and can give Steel Songs a whole new hand rip identity. When paired with locations like Pride Rock or Neverland or even Piglet Captain, you now have an aggressive dimension to the deck as well. And having an aggro presence while also having a handlock presence, whilst having a board control presence of all your songs, this can sound quite terrifying, right? I'm a huge fan. And while we're talking about it, Bare Necessities is a cool card too. This functions in the exact same way as Ursula Questing, but it's on a song card, so it can be used in any Amber deck. You can even use it in Hyper Aggro to be a soft defense against cards like Grab Your Sword, or any non-character removal cards quite often that can make or break your Hyper Aggro game plan. So definitely worth considering. Lawrence. I am rapidly becoming a massive fan of this card. Lawrence is a 3 cost inkable card that has 0 strength, 4 willpower and 2 lore. Except I can't just lie to you. Lawrence actually has 4 strength when he has 0 damage on him. That makes him a very versatile card, since not only does he have a beefy willpower stat with that 2 lore too, but it also makes him a very strong aggressive card. But he can also go on the offensive with his 4 strength when he has no damage on him. He can realistically see play in any metal deck, to be fair, but I've had success with him in Steel Song to give you some solid board presence, or in Tamatoa decks to give you some early game punch maybe. And hitting for 4 strength is very nice, letting you clear the way of Zizu for example, which can otherwise stick around the board a lot longer than it realistically should be. Avalanche. With everyone's secret tech starting to be locations right now, Blue Steel players can look to play Avalanche to help combat them. Being able to completely remove a location on a forecast card is pretty good, especially since Blue Steel can be slow to develop a board presence. Ruby Amethyst sticking a turn 4 for you can be quite annoying. Avalanche will help with this. One massive positive for Avalanche as a tech card though is that it isn't just a location killer, because it also does 1 damage to all of your opponent's characters. This means against other decks like Green Steel, you actually have some utility too. And it also combos stupidly well with Boom, Grab Your Sword and Tinkerbell too. All cards that Blue Steel traditionally already plays, meaning you won't hurt your overall deck strategy to play this, which is very nice. The only problem with Avalanche though is that it costs 1 more than Rise of the Titans and it's uninkable, which is really sad. However, if you really want a location killer that has more utility than just, well, you know, getting rid of locations, then maybe Avalanche is the card for you. Cursed Merfolk. One problem I have with Green Steel is that its early game questing power is garbage. Cursed Merfolk is a fantastic option at providing some early game lore while also fitting into your deck strategy very nicely, since if your opponent banishes it via a challenge, your opponent has to discard a card from their hand. And even if they remove Merfolk another way, like Baboom or Bull for example, that's fine, because that means your Diablo is still alive and kicking it, making it pretty much a lose-lose for your opponent. They either go after your Diablo to stop you drawing cards, or they sink resources into the Cursed Merfolk and they let your Diablo live, while you're now questing for 2. It's kind of awkward. It does already kind of add into the high uninkable count that Green Steel can traditionally have. However, it can be a nightmare for your opponent to deal with if they have like a 1 or 0 card hand and have this little pesky Merfolk questing for 2. It can really add up the pressure. Now we have spoke a lot in this video about locations, so naturally we have to talk about Rise of the Titan, my favourite location answer in metal decks. A 3-cost action that straight up removes a location or an item from play. Removing items also cannot be underestimated, since a ton of decks are reliant on items, like Lucky Dime, Maui's Fishhook or Vitalisphere for example. I like this dual usage. I also like that Rise of the Titans is inkable, and it's the lowest cost location answer too, meaning it's very easy to piece together combo turns like Rise of the Titan to remove Hidden Cove, to make Diablo more vulnerable, and then Grab Your Sword or Boom to finish them off. For me, it's this low cost whilst being inkable and having 2 uses that puts it over the top for me. Jack. Jack is a very cheeky card, a 3-cost card with a sneaky idea ability that gives a character reckless for a single turn when you put him into play. This can be very helpful at locking up big questers like Tamatoa and Bell. But in the Green Steel mirror, you can lock up a big Flynn Rider if you have a low hand size too. Or force your opponent to start challenging with Diablos, which they really don't want to do. Or on a card that has 4 willpower and quest for 2 lore too. This makes him pretty tanky all things considered, being able to absorb hits from Madam Mim's Snake. Due to his low strength though, he does get caught by Brawl and Big Sisu though. But then you always have the trade-off of coming into play powers versus on the field powers. Since if you're trying to stop a big quester from questing, you will need to have Jack in your hand immediately for it to be useful. If you don't, well, there's not much point in playing him. If you wanted a tech which you could put into play earlier and still use it in the same way, we have to look at Jasper. Jasper is a 4 willpower unit who is just as tanky as Jack, while also having 1 more strength too. And when he quests, he stops one of your opponent's characters from questing next turn. This can be used multiple times throughout the game. However, if your opponent was to remove Jasper before you had a chance to quest, then he was useless. If you wanted the best of both worlds, we have to look at John Silver. This mammoth 5/5 2-lore character has the pick your fight power, which is basically Jasper and Jack fused together, since when you play John, and whenever he quests, he gives one of your opponent's characters reckless. This can wreak havoc on your opponent's board. The problem is with John though, is that he's a 6 cost, so he comes into play much later than the other 2. So what team are you on? Jack, John Silver, or Jasper? You could even play Lyle Tiberius Burke for a very similar ability, and whenever one of your characters gets KO'd while he's in play, your opponent loses a lore. I think I'm on Team Jack, but I'd like to know which one you prefer. Now Smash is just a great card in general, let's not make any mistakes about it. Being able to clear the way of something with 3 damage is very strong, and can help with all kinds of board control, like being able to remove a cursed merfolk without having to activate its ability, for example. Although now it's starting to see a little bit more play, mostly to counter Diablo. Since now, green steel players are starting to use Hidden Cove to boost Diablo's willpower to 3 instead of 2. This pushes Diablo out of range of Baboom, which is very sad. This pushes Diablo out of the way of Baboom and grab your sword. And this is where Smash steps in to clear up the mess, since Smash will be able to KO a Diablo even while it's in Hidden Cove, as well as also being able to clear the way of other metagame threats like Madam Minfox, Mr. Smee and the Queen. Smash is just one of those cards that has so many uses that will save you in so many different scenarios, making it a very useful card to consider in your set championships. Mr. Smee. It might be cheeky putting Mr. Smee on here since a lot of decks are already playing him, but I could see some decks like Green Steel starting to play him again too, which it always used to do, by the way. Green Steel's biggest weakness in my opinion is that questing power is very low, and Mr. Smee helps out with that a ton, being a 2-drop that quests for 2 lore. Also has beefy 3/3 stats too, which can help for early game board control, which again is something Green Steel struggles with, especially in the early game. Not a bad card. Jim Hawkins. Jim Hawkins slots straight into the current Bochum dominating deck, Ruby Amethyst. Jim Hawkins is a 5-drop 4/4 2 lore character with 2 abilities. The first one, and the main one, is that when you play him, you can play a location with 4 cost or less for free from your hand when you put Jim into play. And then you can also move to it for free as well. This is insane value because we know locations are very good right now, and there are some incredible locations that Jim could put into play, like Queen Castle to draw more cards, Muck Duck Manor to have a monstrous 9 willpower, Fang to give characters evasive and ward, and RLS Legacy to give characters evasive that are there. All of these locations are 2 lore ones as well. And since Jim can immediately put himself there, you can actually start to get some of the benefits of those locations immediately. And let's not forget that Jim has very decent stats as well. So if the location does get popped for whatever reason, he's still pretty useful. If you really want to double down on locations, then Jim is the way. Go. Quickie. Quickie is a 5-cost 3/4 character that quests for 3 lore. Beefy card all things considered. It also has the spreading good fortune power that boosts all your character's strength by 3 on the same turn you played it down. This is absolutely perfect in Green Steel, since traditionally your strength can be kind of low, meaning if your opponent sticks a Queen Castle or a Muck Duck Manor, you could be in trouble since you haven't really got that big hitter like Maui to get through it. Quickie can help by letting your Diablos now hit for 5 or your Robin Hoods now hitting for 6. And bear in mind, if Robin Hood KOs something in a challenge, you get 2 lore as well. Or on a card that quests for 3 after its initial use, which again helps out Green Steel's traditionally Achilles heel is that it doesn't really quest very high. On paper, this solves a ton of problems for Green Steel, but it has the age-old problem of only being useful on the turn you play it for its strength boosting abilities anyway, and it gets caught in a Madam Medusa crossfire, which isn't very nice for a 5-drop. However, if you can overlook that, you might be onto a winner. Gaston Blue. I like Gaston for his ability of giving you unparalleled levels of consistency in the mid to late game for ramp decks, while also being outside of range of Zizu and Brawl. A solid 4/4 stats 3 lore character, this can give Blue Steel another option to Tinkerbell in matchups where challenging, isn't really so necessary. Letting you grab 1 card from your top 3 while also questing for 3 is very strong. Vitalisphere. Vitalisphere is a very cool card that has started to see a lot more play recently. It's a 1-cost inkable item card that requires you to pay 2 ink to use. If you do, a chosen character of yours gets Challenger +2 and Rush this turn. This is great for jostling for board control and swinging into locations harder. This also makes me think if you're playing a couple of these in RA, you could now open the window to a Super Goofy, who could now swing for 4 while gaining you 2 lore with Rush. Sounds very lovely to me. It's a toss-up about which one you prefer out of Maui's Fishhook and Vitalisphere. Do you prefer being able to give anyone evasive or giving anyone Rush? Only you can make that decision. Argus is starting to see play in some decks, and I'm starting to see why. Traditionally, some metal decks can be slow at the gates, and Argus gives you a beefy option that can clear the way of your opponent's early game threats. while swinging for ridiculously hard into locations too. Now still does have a few options that are dealing with locations at the 2 slot already, like Captain Hook and Boom and Mr. Smee, but they all have their uses and drawbacks. Argus is the most in-your-face version. Argus also claps back to hard at anything that tries to challenge him, whereas Captain Hook kind of peters out because he relies on Challenger to get his increased strength. Mock Duck Manor. This location really doesn't muck about. A 4-cost 2 lore location, meaning it fits right in with the crowd, except Muck Duck Manor removes all utility, like drawing cards, or gaining evasive and ward, like Queen's Castle and Fang respectively, but instead you get a beefy 9 willpower. This pretty much puts it outside of range of most board states, and will only really be susceptible to location-specific cards like Rise of the Titans or Avalanche. I like this because if you miss your Harem, you now have a nice backup option in the early game at the 4 slots, making your deck more versatile, while also doubling up as a late game monster that your opponent has to deal with but most likely won't be able to. Red Pegasus. This little 2-drop Pegasus looks pretty innocent, right? But it's a fantastic counter to one of the strongest decks in the game, Diablo. You see, Pegasus is a 2-drop evasive character with 3 strength. This means it has no problem slamming into exerted Diablos, even if the Diablo is in Hidden Cove. Boosting its willpower by 1 doesn't matter, since Pegasus will still banish it thanks to that monstrous 3 strength. So, if you're struggling with Diablo and you're playing a red deck, you might want to consider Pegasus. And lastly, I want you all to consider 1-cost locations like Neverland, the Bayou, and Deville Manor. These are all very useful at gaining you early lore, especially if your characters in the early game are rather strong like Diablo. Your opponent really won't have time to deal with these locations, meaning they can rack up lore for you over the course of the whole game. Deville Manor was a staple part of my top 4 set championships deck, and it won't be coming out of my green steel deck anytime soon. Real quick, I have to give a shout out to this video sponsor, Dragon Shield. They make the best accessories in the game, and if you want to get your hands on some and save yourself some money, click the link down there and use my code BERT to get 5% off, and it helps me out too. Let's get back to the video.